Hi there, everybody. This is Jeremy Siskind. I am the world famous author of Jazz Piano Fundamentals and playing solo jazz piano. That, of course, is a joke. I'm only famous in my head, maybe in my own household, but probably not even that. But today's not about me. Today is about talking about a really important progression in jazz, what it's doing, how to improvise over it, how to recognize it, and what some common substitutions are. I call this the Diminished Walkup Progression, and the basic sound is this. You'll hear this in, for instance, Ain't Misbehavin', right? Or It Could Happen to You. And lots of other tunes. So let's dive in and talk about the theory. And so first thing to note here, I will zoom in, I'm making a mess already, is that, well, here's what I would write as the chord symbols for this progression. And then B flat over D. Sometimes you'll see this written as D minor, but it really should be a B flat chord with D in the bass. Okay, so if we're going to analyze this, this would be the 1 chord. This would be the 2 chord. This is, kind of the 3, but it's really the 1 in first inversion. In Roman numerals, we call that the 1/6. If you're going to be super nerdy about classical theory. And then this chord is the 7 diminished 7th of 2, and then this is the 7 diminished 7th of 3. Even if it resolves to 1, that chord is still functioning as the 7 diminished 7th of 3. I'll play it for you one more time with these chords in front of you. Super common progression. Now, what's interesting about this? So first of all, first thing to note is that we're basically using this as filler because we're staying in the key of B flat. And that's really important because it means that if you're smart about it, you can improvise using just the B flat major scale or just the scale of the 1 chord, regardless of what key you're in, over this entire progression. Right? I'm just... Now, of course, whenever you do this, you have to be careful about which notes you're landing on. If you're, really emphasizing a note that's rubbing up against a note of the chord, that's going to be trouble. So don't do it without listening. Don't do anything without listening, please. That's just going to solve all of our problems instantaneously. Okay, now... where do I want to go with this next? So it's very common to substitute each of these diminished chords with dominant chords instead. So this first one's very clear. We would use a G7. So that would be the 5 of 2. So the G7's leading to the C minor. And what's interesting is in this next measure, we have kind of 2 different options depending on the type of tune that it is. It could be that you use an A7. That would be the 5 of 3. So listen to that sound. Very nice. So that's the 5 of 3, or... because, again, we said this was basically the 1 chord in first inversion, we can use the 5 chord, the 5 of 1, to substitute instead. And what do we get if we do that? So if we have B flat, G7, C minor, F7, we get like a super familiar progression, the 1, 6, 2, 5 progression. This is like the progression in rhythm changes and all over the place. And so these two progressions, I'm not sure that I would go so far as to say that they could just be switched at any point, but they're pretty darn similar. And in fact, if I'm playing I Got Rhythm, I might choose the diminished walk-up. So you know, the normal progression would be this 1 6 2 5. But it could be pretty nifty, right? They're pretty much could be exchanged for one another. And then whenever we have a dominant chord, it's acting as a 5, which dominant chords usually are, we could add a 2 chord in front of that. So our progression could be B flat 6, D minor, G7, C minor 7, E minor 7, A7, and then that goes to B flat over D or something like that. So if I'm playing It Could Happen to You, I could play that diminished walk-up, or I could play this bottom progression. Now, I do want to edit something I said slightly, or at least make it more specific. These, because they are tonicizing minor keys, they need to be minor 2/5. So it would be a D minor 7 with a flat 5, and a G7 with a flat 9, and then an E minor 7 with a flat 5, A7 with a flat 9. Now, I'm going to really get in the weeds a second, and some of you might be saying, well, that one's not tonicizing a minor chord. It's tonicizing B flat. But that's a 2/5 to the 3 chord. And in a major key, the 3 is minor. So it's tonicizing a minor key center. So we still need to treat it. It's going to sound better if we treat it as a minor chord. I've never tried doing this for a Misbehavin. Let's see if it works. It's a little bit funky. It just moves so fast that I'm not sure that that I would actually use it. But it's possible if I were playing really slow. It's not quite the sound or the tune to put those 2 5s in there, but it's technically possible. Okay? So you can see we have these 3 progressions, at least, that are interchangeable. We either have the diminished walk-up on the top. We have the diminished walk-up with dominant substituting, which could be a 1 6 2 5, depending on how you treat it. And then on the bottom, we have, we have that same progression. Let's see if the purple works. Nope. We have that same progression with 2 5s in there. And now, one of the things that's interesting here that you may or may not have noticed, I'm sorry, this lesson's a little bit scattered, but hopefully you're learning something, is these 2 chords are what we're using to tonicize the 2. Okay, so we could lead to that C minor either with B diminished 7th or with G7 flat 9. And if you're doubting that these 2 chords are interchangeable, let me show you the notes of these chords. So I'm just going to stack them up. I'm not going to put them in any kind of fancy voicing. B, B, D, F, A flat. Those are the notes of B diminished 7th. G, B, D, F, A flat. Those are the notes of G7 flat 9. Notice anything here? If we take out the G on bottom, those 2 chords are exactly the same. They have the same notes. So when I say, oh, you could use either one, it doesn't really matter, they're interchangeable, it's because they have the same notes. Like, they're the same freaking chord. And then scale-wise, too, we often talk about using the whole half octatonic scale with diminished chords. So it would end up being the scale for B. It's the whole half octatonic scale. Some people call that the diminished scale. I don't really care. And then for dominant 7 flat 9 chords, we often talk about using the half whole octatonic scale. So we would start on G and we would alternate half steps and whole steps. I think I have a video called Deep Dive on Octatonic Scales or something like that. If I'll try to include it here somewhere. And you're going to notice, assuming I've done this correctly, that these scales are exactly the same. B, it's the same. C sharp, D, E, F, G, A flat, B flat. So as you're improvising, if you prefer to think about G7 rather than B diminished seventh, then you're certainly welcome to do that, because assuming you're using an octatonic scale, they're going to be the same scales. They have the exact same notes. Okay, do I need to tell you anything else? Well, let's talk for a second about voicing diminished chords, which is always kind of tricky in a question. And this progression is actually pretty tough. It doesn't follow the voicing rules. One thing to notice about this progression is that the bass notes move upwards, right? It really ascends, whereas in almost every other kind of tonal music, the progression descends. So that's just interesting. And then here we're going to put, I'll call it B flat 6 over D here. Okay. So here's your bass notes. Beautiful. Okay. So we're going to try to put our thirds and sevenths, or sixths when they replace the sevenths, in the bass. So we're going to go D is the third, G is the sixth. I'll make this a little bit bigger for you. You don't need to see my face. There it is. All right. D is the third, G is the sixth, D is the third, A flat is the seventh, E flat's the third, B flat's the seventh, E is the third, B flat's the seventh. And then here, if this isn't going to be an inversion, then I would voice it more like a D minor chord, because otherwise you're just doubling that D down below, and it's not going to be a very rich or interesting voicing. Well, another great feat of technological innovation for Jeremy. Okay, and then we want to put color tones on top. So we'll start with the ninth and the fifth. And now, color tones get interesting for diminished chords. I'm often choosing to use the root as one of the color tones in a diminished seventh chord. If you're really craving more color, you can select notes from the whole half octatonic scale. For example, you could choose to use, this C sharp or this B flat in there. Sometimes I find that to be more distracting than anything. So I'm going to use the fifth and then the root. This is reminding me of the tune Liza, which also is a tune that uses this chord progression. Okay, so same thing. This is the ninth and the fifth, and then the root and the fifth. So these all actually get to really keep the same form going up. Third on bottom, third on bottom, third on bottom. And then here, you could use... I'm trying to think what I would actually play here instead of just giving you like a theoretician's response. So if you're thinking about the D minor, you could put in the ninth and the fifth. It's a little bit awkward because that ninth is not really part of the key. So if you want to emphasize the B flat 6, nobody else is playing that B flat. You can play the D down there. Helps you really get that B flat sound. If you want to emphasize the 6, you could add a G and get kind of a 5-note voicing there. Now, it is interesting if you start with the 6th or 7th on bottom. I refer to those as type B voicings. I think a lot of jazz teachers do. Let me show you what happens. Okay, so We're gonna go 6th, 3rd, 7th, 3rd, 7th, 3rd, 7th, 3rd. That's a B flat, by the way. And then 7th, 3rd. So we're getting awfully high here. So we could do something actually real similar. We can use the 5th and the 9th, the 5th and the root, 5th and the 9th, 5th and the root. And then this chord's always the question. That C sharp really wants to pull up to the D. So again, I'd probably use 3 notes here and fill in. Something like that. If you are feeling adventurous, you could create a chromatic line on top by using the note, we're going to call it kind of like the 9th in parentheses. Diminished chords don't really have a 9th, but if they did, it would probably be like this. And then we could kind of resolve differently at the end. Do something like that. Even you could put the root of the B flat major chord there and then do something like that. So those are a couple different voicing types that you could use for that diminished walk-up progression. Assuming that you want to really hear those diminished chords really clearly. Just let me show you what you could do if you really wanted a ton of color. You could substitute in the like quote unquote 13th of the diminished chord here and here, and now you get a really colorful. All right, folks. Oh, I have to bend down to be in this camera angle. Thanks so much for watching and checking out that diminished walk-up progression. I hope I gave you some ideas. Of course, I encourage you to check out my books, Playing Solo Jazz Piano Fundamentals, as well as to check out my class. I offer a 32-session class through my community college, super affordable. I will put in information in the links. See y'all later.